Hi, my name's Emma Pinnock and I am the Director of the Essential Education Group. The Essential Education Group is a consultancy and training company that supports schools and families in the area of special educational needs. So I've been asked to answer the question, what bit of advice would you give a teacher who was receiving and welcoming a child with intellectual disabilities into their classroom? This is really an interesting question because we're actually in a really interesting time when it comes to inclusion, and more teachers are going to be asking this question as they go forward. So what is my answer to this? My first point, and will always be my first point, is that we have to know that there is an individual child there. An individual child who has their own desires, their own likes, their own dislikes. They're going to have lots of things that they're bringing to your classroom, like all other 29 pupils that you have. I think our first job is to understand them as an individual. Our first job is to get to know their personality and who they are. Because if we can understand the child, opposed to the diagnosis, we're actually halfway through the journey. So going from there is then understanding, what does this diagnosis mean? This young person may come to you with a diagnosis of autism or Down syndrome or speech and language or hearing differences. And if this is the case, then it's understanding what the potential strengths and the potential barriers of these needs are really important to your journey as well. However, I also say that with a little caveat. And the caveat is, everything we read in a textbook about autism will not necessarily apply itself to every child you meet with autism. As the saying goes, if you meet one child with autism, one child with Down syndrome, one child with hearing needs, you've met that one child or person. And so it's understanding that a diagnosis will give you lots of information about the things you should be looking out for, but also you have to then apply that to that young person. And is this the way that that barrier is really impacting that individual? So it's a little bit of thinking time. And anybody that's had training with me will know that I always say that observation is key. I think one of the key things you can do for a young person who's coming into your class with additional needs is to observe. Observe what's happening for them in the learning process. So not necessarily what you are doing as a teacher, but what that child is actually experiencing in the learning environment. And then you can start to make some kind of ideas and guesses, because at first it's always guesses until we get to understand them, about what might need to be put in place. So things like, is there potentially sensory needs here? Is there potentially more cognition and learning needs here, apart from what's been said on the paperwork? Is there potentially some social needs here? So that moment of observation and not making any quick judgments is going to be a really key asset to how that young person then manages the rest of their academic year with you, and how you also have the relationship with that child throughout the academic year. I think if we can understand the individual, then we can understand the diagnosis, and then we can put that into context through our observations. We're going to start the year off really well with this young person. The thing here though is that, like all of us, a child with additional needs will present differently from day to day. And so we have to be really conscious and aware that some practices that we figure out straight at the beginning may not work 2 months later. So being willing to be reflective and proactive around what we see about a young person's needs is going to also be a really key element to how successful their time in your classroom might be. So this is a really small snippet around how we can start the year. I could have gone into all the strategies you could put in place, and I could have put into all of the things you might want to look at from the learning point of view. But as teachers, we all know that our relationships with the young people are the things that is the one thing that's going to make our year with them successful or not. So if we can get under the need of an individual child from the beginning of the year, it will enhance the success of what we're trying to achieve for them. I hope that's been helpful.